Welcome back to Channel 4 Wrestling News. I'm your host, Ian, and by the end of this video, you will be completely up to date with everything that is making headlines in the world of pro wrestling this week. And we absolutely have to start off with All Elite Wrestling, their big Blood and Guts event this week from Daly's Place in Jacksonville. Fairly notable show, fairly popular show. Obviously, this War Games style match that they're calling Blood and Guts, over a year in the making. They announced that they were going to do this match March of last year. Obviously, the pandemic hit. There was some complications, obviously. They were taken off the road. They did a bunch of shows from QT Marshall's gym, and then they moved into Daly's Place. But we finally did get the 2-ring double cage War Games match this week on Dynamite. Now, a bit of a note here. The War Games Blood and Guts match was the only match to actually take place live on the show. The other 4 matches, including Cody Rhodes versus QT Marshall, which was a great match, they were all taped previously. And there was no fans in attendance for those matches, but they showed those matches on the screen from like 8 till 9 on Wednesday night in front of the fans that were in attendance. And the crowd noise that they made was added to the broadcast. So we did get live reactions from fans, but the actual matches themselves weren't live. I don't know if that's a big deal to you. It seemed important enough to mention, at least. But let's talk about the actual War Games match. If you watched our video from a few days ago, from a few days before the event, we talked about how this was a very important match for both factions and how it was hard to pick a winner because it seemed like both factions really needed a win. You have the Pinnacle. This is their first match together as a unit. They've only been a unit for a matter of weeks now. Has it even been a month? It might have been. I don't know. Anyway, so very important match for the Pinnacle to win because it's their debut as a faction, their debut as a stable. It would be a harsh blow for them if they lost in their first match as a stable. But on the other hand, it was also a really important match for the Inner Circle to win because they just turned babyface. So they're just good guys for the first time. So it seems like it would be a bit of a blow for them to lose their first match as babyfaces. And the other part of it is that when Chris Jericho and Maxwell Jacob Friedman had a singles match a little while ago, it was MJF that won. So MJF has seemingly already, he was already ahead, already leading in the series going into this match. Although back when MJF and Chris Jericho met in singles competition, like, they weren't feuding. I think that match was actually, like, if MJF won, then he got in the Inner Circle. So it wasn't like a feud. But still, MJF holds a singles victory over Chris Jericho, and now his faction, the Pinnacle, holds this victory over the Inner Circle. But the victory, while not tainted in any way, well, maybe a little tainted based on how they won. And I want to talk about the last 2 segments of the Blood and Guts match because I think some of this is getting overlooked a little bit. The second last commercial, like before the last commercial break, it was entirely the Inner Circle beating up the Pinnacle. Like, there was not one moment of offense, or at least not like a sustained moment of offense from the Pinnacle that entire segment. That from when they came back from picture-in-picture to when they went back to picture-in-picture, however many minutes later. They were giving FTR pile drivers onto the exposed wood. Santana was using a fork on somebody's head. I can't remember. Like, it was all the Inner Circle beating up the Pinnacle. So you go into the commercial break going, man, the Inner Circle is so much better than the Pinnacle. They're beating them up. They're giving them pile drivers. They're sticking them with forks like they're Abdullah the Butcher. The Inner Circle is surely going to win this match. And then, of course, during the commercial break, MJF and Chris Jericho leave the cage. Tully Blanchard did something to help them leave the cage. And then they get on top of the cage and the whole last segment starts. But I thought that was very important that before we go into the finish of the match, it's established that the Inner Circle is really winning the match. And then, of course, we get on top of the cage MJF threatens to throw Jericho off the cage. And he says, like, either submit or I'm going to throw this guy off the cage. And they're like, fine, we submit. And the Pinnacle wins the match, and then MJF throws him off the cage anyway because he's a dirty bastard. So, I mean, I've heard, like, I've seen some people like, oh, what a cheap ending or whatever. But this is a fairly standard finish to a match that can only end via submission. Generally, whenever the baby face loses, like, this is sort of a saving face kind of way for a babyface team to lose a match like this. Because they didn't lose because they were losing the match. They didn't lose because the Pinnacle were better wrestlers. MJF was just willing to do something so violent, so dirty, so underhanded that the Inner Circle was just had to quit, because not for their own safety. Sammy Guevara didn't quit because he was in pain. Sammy Guevara submitted on behalf of the Inner Circle because he was worried about what would happen to Jericho, right? So it's they lost, but like part of it was like Sammy's back in the Inner Circle and he's back with Chris Jericho and he doesn't want anything bad to happen to Jericho. The Inner Circle are such good friends, such a good solid unit that they can't let anything happen to Jericho. And so it's the good in their character that ultimately cost them the match. And that's like in Shakespearean terms, or in that's like what is it? Like a tragedy of character or a personality thing, or there's some term. I'm sure somebody smarter than me remembers this from high school drama class, but like when it's a flaw in someone's character that ultimately leads to their death, it's called like a tragic flaw. Like, it's a fairly standard thing in storytelling. And that's what you saw at Blood and Guts. The reason the Inner Circle lost is because they are so united as a team that they couldn't bear the thought of anything that bad happening to Jericho, right? And that's the story that was told in Blood and Guts. So even though we went into this match saying like, man, the Inner Circle really needs to win this because it's their first match as a babyface. Yeah, they lost. But it was this sort of face-saving type of loss. And as for the Pinnacle, they're the winners. MJF can now say he's beaten Chris Jericho in a singles match. And he can say that his faction has beaten the Inner Circle in the first ever Blood and Guts match in AEW. So it's a big win for MJF that can now move him on to other things. And I think he probably will move away from a feud with Chris Jericho, at least for a little bit, because I don't think we're going to see Chris Jericho for a while. I think Jericho's going to be away and selling the injury from being thrown off the top of the cage. Like, it's not like we're going to see Jericho next week, right? Because this was such a vicious fall off a cage and such a dangerous move that MJF put him through, that it's not as though Jericho is going to simply just recover and come back. It's going to be a long time before we see Jericho again. At least, like, it's got to be at least until Double or Nothing. Maybe even beyond that. I wouldn't be surprised at all if we don't see Jericho between now and Double or Nothing, and if we don't see Jericho at Double or Nothing. I think this could be an extended time away from AEW for Chris Jericho. And where does MJF then move on from here? Does he feud with other members of the Inner Circle? Like, maybe we could move on to an MJF Sammy Guevara feud here. I think that is fairly possible. I think we could see MJF versus Sammy Guevara at Double or Nothing. And man, it's like Sammy Guevara, he had his wrestling boots on for this match. It seemed like every 2 to 3 minutes, Guevara was springboarding off of one set of ropes to another set of ropes and jumping into some move and doing a whole bunch of Sammy Guevara-like stuff. Like, he was very much Sammy Guevara in this match. And it's interesting the last 2 years for this faction, because right after this match, I went and watched a replay of Stadium Stampede, which was Double or Nothing last year. And it was the Elite versus the Inner Circle. And it's just interesting to see the changes that have taken place within the inner circle in that year. And now seeing where they are now. I mean, they were the major heel faction for the first year. And now they're going to be this top babyface faction, maybe without Chris Jericho for a while. But another thing about Blood and Guts is they actually built up a lot more matches. Like, there is a big card for Dynamite next week. And the rumor is that because AEW might get sort of booted around when the NBA playoffs start, like they might have to, like I think the go home show for Double or Nothing is going to happen on Friday night now because of the NBA playoffs. So I think they're trying to put on some big shows leading up to when they are going to have to deal with the NBA playoffs. Because if you look at the lineup for next week, it's a huge show. So up on your screen right now, we just have the lineup for next week. TNT Championship match between Darby Allin and Miro. Now let's break this down for a second. Miro's never been pinned or submitted in AEW. Darby Allin is having a great run as the TNT champion. He's in main events all the time. He's doing main events for shows that are gaining, or for shows that are watched by more than 1 million people. So like Darby Allin is someone they've really said like, oh, okay, we got something here. We got something with this guy. Is he going to lose the title to Miro? Like, this is another case of sort of the inner circle versus the pinnacle, where it's like, I don't know if either one of these guys can lose right now. Like, it's going to be a blow for either one of them to lose. Like Darby Allin, this TNT title run has been so successful for him. It seems like it would be premature to end it now. But Miro, ever since he arrived in AEW, he's been protected. He might not always be in the top main event matches, but anytime he's been on the losing end of a match, it's usually because Kip Sabian is getting pinned. Like, I don't believe Miro has been pinned or submitted in AEW. Are they gonna have that happen for the first time next Wednesday? That would be a pretty big deal. This is a case where I almost wonder if a time limit draw is the most likely scenario. Or like, I would say, in order of what I think is going to happen, time limit draw, Miro winning the title, or Darby Allin winning when some person who's about to start feuding with Miro interferes. Like maybe Kip Sabian's mad that he got his hand broken by Miro in that segment the other week, and he's going to come back and cost Miro the match. Maybe. On the other hand, I think Kip Sabian really is injured, so he might not be coming back for a while. So I don't know who's going to win the match between Darby Allin and Miro. And that's kind of the fun of AEW sometimes, is that the match results are important, and you don't always know who's going to win. So it's pretty fun. Then we've got an AEW Tag Team Championship match as the Young Bucks defend against Christopher Daniels and Frankie Kazarian. One of two things are possible here. The first is Christopher Daniels and Frankie Kazarian win the AEW Tag Team titles. The second possibility is that they don't win the Tag Team titles and then permanently disband as a result. Christopher Daniels and Frankie Kazarian, weren't they called like Bad Attitude or something or other? All the way back in the like TNA days. Popular tag team in TNA, Ring of Honor, now AEW. Is this the end of the line for Frankie Kazarian and Christopher Daniels? It might be. It might be coming to an end next Wednesday on Dynamite. Then we've got a number one contendership match for the AEW World Championship. And this was built up on Blood or Guts when Tony Schiavone was interviewing Kenny Omega. And Kenny Omega announced that there will be a number one contendership match for next week between the number one ranked Orange Cassidy and the number two ranked Pac. And I thought this was interesting because remember last week, for the last month, Hangman Page had been the number one contender. But he faces Brian Cage last week. Brian Cage attacked him before the match and then just tore through him throughout the rest of the match. That takes him out of the number one contendership position. And the number 2 and 3 ranked wrestlers, Orange Cassidy and Pac, they both move up. I really like that when AEW does stuff like that, where, and we saw this earlier with Britt Baker. When Hikaru Shida had defeated Tai Conti and successfully defended the AEW Women's Championship against Tai Conti, Conti was ranked number 1. Britt Baker was ranked number 2. After Shida beats Conti, Britt Baker comes out on the stage, points to the rankings, and, Tai Conti drops out of the number 1 spot, and there's Britt Baker to come right back up. So that's another example of how, wins or losses matter in AEW. Hangman Page lost, so he's out of the title picture. Britt Baker moves into the title picture after Tai Conti loses. So I like that. So Omega is then talking about how, I'm not really going to face Orange Cassidy, right? The guy who puts his hands in his pockets. So Kenny Omega is just completely writing off the idea that Orange Cassidy can defeat Pac. Which of course brings out Orange Cassidy, who really does nothing throughout the entire segment, but just stands there. Kenny Omega steals his glasses, things like this. And it's one of those things where, it seems like Orange Cassidy is likely going to beat Pac. And then that would be our AEW World Championship match at Double or Nothing, Kenny Omega versus Orange Cassidy. And I think that's a very interesting match, because Orange Cassidy has proven that people will buy his merchandise. People will watch him on TV. People like Orange Cassidy. But he is a very unique wrestler. He's got a lot of comedy to his character. And so some people aren't sold on the idea of Orange Cassidy kind of being in this position where he can challenge for world titles. But I think what really pushed Orange Cassidy to a level where he could do that was the trilogy of matches he had with Chris Jericho, as well as that one pay-per-view match that he had with Pac previously. If you remember, Orange Cassidy and Pac met on pay-per-view. I can't remember when it was, but they met on pay-per-view. And the whole basis of the build-up to Orange Cassidy versus Pac was that this time Orange Cassidy's gonna try. And that had been the thing. He'd been so apathetic. The same level of apathy that wouldn't allow Orange Cassidy's thumb to fully extend when giving the thumbs up was the same thing preventing him from having these types of matches against guys like Chris Jericho and Pac. But with that apathetic attitude gone, and him now wanting to try, that makes him a world title contender. And they've had him on all the show. He wins, he beat somebody on Dynamite last week. I can probably... Yeah, Orange Cassidy beat Pentagon last week. So that's no small victory. And sometimes you have to do this with AEW where you're like, why is this guy ranked number 1? But there's always a reason. They're never just throwing guys into different positions. It's always because they've won a bunch of matches. Somebody else lost a bunch of matches. So look at this. Orange Cassidy, he hasn't lost a singles match since December 3rd when he lost to MJF. He lost a TNT title match to Cody in October, but he is 8-0. 8-0 in 2021. Now, granted, and this is one thing that maybe you can harp on AEW a little bit, the people that he's beaten aren't exactly top contenders. Like, you look, he beat Luther, Steven Stetson, Ryan Nemeth, John Schuyler, Prince Kai, Dean Alexander, VSK, and then finally he beat Pentagon. So he's not exactly had the toughest competition in 2021, but he is undefeated. As for Pac, he has not lost a singles match since February 26th, 2020. And that was when he lost a best 2 out of 3 falls match to Kenny Omega. Remember that? So Pac has not lost a singles match since before the pandemic. Think of how long we've been dealing with this crap for. Pac's been undefeated in singles matches that whole time. He's beaten Orange Cassidy, he's beaten Chuck Taylor, he's beaten The Butcher, The Blade, Eddie Kingston, VSK, Ryan Nemeth, Dean Alexander, and Serpentico. So while they're not exactly beating top-notch competition, they are being very careful to have them win all their matches, right? And so we're now in May, and they made sure that Pac and Orange Cassidy were both undefeated all year so they could be put in this position, and probably with the idea that Orange Cassidy needs to avenge his loss to Pac in order to qualify for a world title match. And he also needs to be undefeated all year long. Because remember, basically it's a clean slate the start of every year. So Orange Cassidy is perfect in 2021, as is Pac. But they're the number 1, number 2 contenders. So whoever wins from that, they move on to face Kenny Omega at Double or Nothing. That should be pretty good. Also, on Dynamite next week, the Forbidden Door will fly open once again as New Japan Pro Wrestling's Yuji Nagata comes in to face Jon Moxley for the IWGP United States Championship. And obviously this should be a very interesting match. Both Moxley and Nagata were on New Japan Strong last night. Haven't had a chance to watch it yet. But you wonder if this is going to play into where Jon Moxley ends up going for Double or Nothing as well. And it definitely looks as though Moxley and Eddie Kingston are going to be continuing their feud with the Elite, but with Kenny Omega now moving on to face the winner between Orange Cassidy and Pac, neither Moxley or Kingston's going to be facing Omega on the pay-per-view. So it looks like they're going to be facing other members of the Elite, either the Young Bucks or the Good Brothers, is what I would imagine we'll see from Moxley and Eddie Kingston. If Moxley and Eddie Kingston are going to be facing the Young Bucks on the pay-per-view, they're going to have to win a lot of tag matches to qualify for a tag title shot. But we'll see. Could just be the Good Brothers as well. But that's a pretty stacked episode of Dynamite for next week. We've also got just 2 matches sort of booked for Double or Nothing on May 30th. We've got one match not fully booked, AEW World Championship between Kenny Omega facing either Orange Cassidy or Pac. And the AEW Women's Championship is going to be on the line, Hikaru Shida versus Britt Baker. And you've got to be wondering now if this is where Britt Baker does it. Britt Baker has been a major player in the AEW Women's division since the beginning. Since the very beginning. She's literally the first female wrestler the company signed. She's arguably been the most entertaining part of the women's division the entire time, especially after her heel turn. Is this where she does it? Is this where AEW's women's division not only has Britt Baker as the face, but as the champion? It could be. But to do that, she has to end, the longest reigning championship run in AEW history with Hikaru Shida. I think that's the case. I'm assuming that's the case, that she's the longest reigning champion in AEW history. I can't imagine it's not. But that's going to be a very big match. That is arguably the biggest match that the women's division has ever had. You can argue maybe the lights out match between Thunder Rosa versus Britt Baker to main event Dynamite was bigger. I don't know. I think this is bigger. I think Hikaru Shida is the best champion this division's ever had. Britt Baker, probably the most entertaining part of this division, the most active part of this division. Arguably the backstage or like non-kayfabe MVP of the division, Britt Baker. I think this is a very important match in both of their careers to take place at Double or Nothing. And they will continue to build up this feud on Dynamite over the next 3 weeks. We only got 3 weeks till Double or Nothing. That's amazing. On the last video that we did, we talked about how Daniel Bryan is reportedly a free agent right now. And he had done interviews in the past talking about, hey, one thing that I'm actually doing right now is I'm trying to convince WWE to let me wrestle for other promotions while part of the WWE. And so these are discussions that he's apparently having with WWE while negotiating a possible new contract. So the idea that maybe Daniel Bryan would show up on some other wrestling promotion's television seems less far-fetched now than it did to me in the previous video. The reason for this is there's been some cryptic comments made from quote-unquote wrestling insiders that lead me to believe Daniel Bryan could possibly re-sign with WWE, but in a way that, like, he's allowed to go and wrestle for other promotions, which sounds ridiculous. Like, if you follow WWE since Vince McMahon took over, the idea that he would allow this it just seems completely far-fetched. But Daniel Bryan has a lot of leverage, or had a lot of leverage going into these negotiations with Vince McMahon. Vince McMahon doesn't want to see Daniel Bryan, a guy who's main evented WrestleManias, go to another wrestling promotion. He knows that Daniel Bryan is worth a little bit of money. Otherwise, he wouldn't have put him in the main event of WrestleMania. In 35, at the most recent WrestleMania, or at WrestleMania 30, although he put Daniel Bryan in the main event of WrestleMania 30 after kicking and screaming. But so now we're in a spot where, is it possible that Daniel Bryan said, hey, I'm only re-signing with you guys if you allow me to, like, hey, do some stuff with New Japan Pro Wrestling, or hey, go back and do some stuff with Ring of Honor. And Ring of Honor, I think, is the promotion that he would be going to. So Dave Meltzer sort of hinted on his radio show that he knows something. I mean, kind of. He made some very cryptic comments about how this story with Daniel Bryan reminds him of Brian Pillman. And he didn't go into why, right? He just said, oh, I'm getting some flashbacks of Dark Side of the Ring on this. Then Brian Alvarez asked him, I was like, what does that have to do with anything? And he said, oh, well, the Brian Pillman story is airing. And of course, if you follow Brian Pillman's career, or you happen to catch the Dark Side of the Ring, or any other documentaries that are on this, Brian Pillman in 1996, he was signed to WCW, convinced WCW to give him his release so he could go around and do this loose cannon free agent angle and show up on ECW, show up wherever. And he eventually used this to negotiate a WWE contract. So how does this play into what's happening with Daniel Bryan right now? Possibly it could have no connection whatsoever. But those were some cryptic comments which might be alluding to something like that going on with Daniel Bryan right now. And here's a quote that Dave Meltzer said, which I thought was interesting. And at this time, he's trying to avoid saying too much. And all he said was, there's some crazy things going on in wrestling. Some really crazy things going on in wrestling, but they haven't happened yet. I'm sure one of them will be when he shows up somewhere, which could be WWE, could be somewhere else. That's about it for now. Now, I'm certainly not of the mind that we should be trusting people with anonymous sources. The truth tends to get bent pretty heavily in those scenarios. But we've definitely got a case here where somebody is trying to hint that they know something is about to happen. So this only benefits Dave Meltzer if that something does happen. So maybe it will. Maybe Daniel Bryan is going to show up somewhere that we don't expect. If that happens, I would have to imagine it's Ring of Honor. Daniel Bryan, as Bryan Danielson, has a long history with Ring of Honor. Ring of Honor is no real threat to WWE. And it allows WWE to kind of have this feeling that they're contributing to the Forbidden Door too. They're just as hip as these other wrestling companies, and the hardcore wrestling fan base should be just as into WWE. But they're not loaning their talent out to a true competitor, because Ring of Honor is not a true competitor. And also, when you look at what Ring of Honor is doing right now, Ring of Honor is not doing any Forbidden Door stuff. So you almost wonder, is like, well, what does Ring of Honor know? Is Ring of Honor in on this? How come they're not bringing in guys from New Japan Pro Wrestling or sending their guys to AEW? Does it have something to do with this deal with Bryan Danielson? I have no idea. There could be nothing even remotely interesting going on here. But there's a lot of hinting and cryptic comments that say otherwise. So some real bad news for New Japan Pro Wrestling this week as they announced that they are postponing their Wrestle Grand Slam events for May 15th. That was in Yokohama. And the big show from the Tokyo Dome on May 29th, that was to have Will Ospreay defend the IWGP World Championship against Kazuchika Okada. Now, in Japan, a state of emergency has been declared. Things were getting better. New Japan was on the road. They were doing shows in front of fans. Obviously, things took a turn, went the other way. Things are shutting down again. In addition to that, there were 6 people removed from the Wrestling Dontaku Night 2 event, which we talked about in the last video. One of those people being Kazuchika Okada. 2 of the people removed. New Japan Pro Wrestling said that it was the 2 people had showed up for Wrestling Dontaku Night 2 with a fever. And they were sent home, and then 4 other wrestlers, they didn't say who was in what group, 4 other wrestlers were sent home due to health and safety protocols, probably meaning they had some extended contact with the people who presented with a fever. The 2 people who presented with a fever, this is according to New Japan's update, tested positive for COVID-19. So, are those other 4 wrestlers going to test positive for COVID-19? Remember, one of those guys is supposed to be in the main event on the 29th. So, in addition to the state of emergency in Japan and how that would affect things, there's also the issue of, if Kazuchika Okada tested positive for coronavirus in early May, you've got to get him to test negative and be okay come May 29th. You'd probably want him better come May 15th to do the show in Yokohama as well to build up that match. So they were really kind of put in a bad position. And it's not surprising at all, especially after what happened at Wrestling Dontaku, that these events are being postponed. They also had a planned event on June 6th, which is probably up in the air at this point now. It's sort of what we've been dealing with now for the last couple of years is like, look, just do what you can and things might get shut down and you just deal with it in whatever way you can, right? Because obviously we will get Will Ospreay versus Kazuchika Okada at some point, but you start pushing into the New Japan schedule, right? It's like, okay, well, and especially the way New Japan does it with everything being planned out so far in advance, it's like, okay, well, if you're not going to do Ospreay versus Okada on the 29th, when do you do it? Or do you just skip over that and then go back to what you planned? And then obviously you're moving into the G1 territory as well. So if you don't get these Ospreay versus Okada matches in before the summer, you might not get it in. And then how does that change your storytelling for the rest of the year? And it's unfortunate for Will Ospreay because it almost feels like he needs this match against Okada to legitimize. Is that a word? Legitimize? To make legitimate his title reign. It's early in the morning. I don't know what are words and what aren't words. But anyway, it feels like Will Ospreay needs this match against Okada to make his title run feel legitimate, right? Because you go back to January and Okada beat Ospreay in the Tokyo Dome. But now Ospreay is the champion because he won the New Japan Cup and got a title shot and won. So now it's like, okay, but on the biggest show of the year, you lost to this guy. You lost to this guy who used to be your mentor, who used to be the leader of the faction that you were in. How do we view you as the true champion until we've seen you beat that guy? We have seen Ospreay beat Okada. He beat him in the G1 last year, but that was right when the Great Okan and that was right when he was starting his faction. So the idea was he only won because he turned heel and got some outside help to beat Kazuchika Okada. So it still feels like, okay, Will Ospreay, if you're the man, if you're really the top wrestler in New Japan Pro Wrestling, you still have to beat Okada to prove it. And it's very interesting the way they did it, because Okada hasn't been in the title picture for like a year and a half. Like, he lost it at Wrestle Kingdom in 2020, right? And he hasn't, but he's still portrayed as, in many ways, as like the best wrestler. But he only misses out on being back in the title picture because of something not due to him, right? Like he went into the New Japan Cup and he was dealing with a whole bunch of injuries and he lost in the first round. Or he would have moved on to the finals in the G1 last year, except for Will Ospreay, brought in a new faction to cheat him out of it. So he's always like cheated out of it, or he doesn't win because he's injured or something like that. And they've just been very crafty with how they've removed Okada from the title picture for the last year and a half. But now, even though he lost in the first round of the New Japan Cup, even though he didn't win the G1 in 2020 because he beat Ospreay in the Tokyo Dome at Wrestle Kingdom, now we feel like we need to see Ospreay versus Okada. We need to see if Ospreay can defeat Kazuchika Okada before we really view him as like a legitimate top guy, right? Like, he's the IWGP World Champion. You'll never be able to take that away from him. But it still feels like he needs to beat Okada with the title on the line, or in the Tokyo Dome, because Wrestle Grand Slam is going to be in the Tokyo Dome. It feels like we need to see Ospreay defeat Okada in that situation to really view him as the champion. So this is an important match, and we need to get it at some point, and we probably need to get it before the G1. But this whole postponing thing, it's going to throw a monkey wrench into everything. It's going to throw a wrench into all the plans. And we're just going to have to see how everything plays out. So we don't talk a lot about Major League Wrestling in these videos, but MLW had a really significant happening angle that took place on their show this week. Now, MLW is not going to have any new content out for about 2 months. They're taking a hiatus until July 10th, when they're going to do a show with live fans inside the ECW Arena, Philadelphia's 2300 Arena. So, obviously, they were billing up this show that aired this week as their season finale. And they really played up like, hey, we're going to have a significant angle on the show. Since they've come back, they've been sort of building up this Azteca Underground group, which is meant to be sort of the spiritual successor to Lucha Underground. And they've been referring to this guy known only as El Jefe. And they've had the stuff up on their website. They've been doing hints through social media on their shows. If you were a Lucha Underground fan, it became easy to see that it was like, oh, okay, I think they're talking about Dario Cueto here. Now, I don't think they can use the term Dario Cueto, although the TV channel that used to air this went out of business. So I don't know. Maybe they can. And also on the show, on Lucha Underground, like, Dario Cueto died. And then, like, it was like his brother in the 4th season or something like that. So I don't know. But anyway, Dario Cueto, known as El Jefe. I think they actually are going to come up with another name for him. Won't spoil that for you. But so he's back, and he does this little scene where Selena De La Renta has been brought to him. Like, Selena De La Renta had been involved with Azteca Underground, but ran afoul, or just ran out of favor with El Jefe. El Jefe ends the show by saying, "I'm building a new temple, and that requires a sacrifice." Then the camera cuts away. The implication, or the implication, that might have been the right way to say it, being that he sacrificed Selena De La Renta. She's now dead in MLW storyline. Man, wrestling, in the last 5 years, wrestling has gotten really comfortable killing people. Anyway, so Selena De La Renta is sacrificed, and now we have the former Dario Cueto, who was, if you didn't follow Lucha Underground, Dario Cueto was just a treasure on this show. Like, he was really fun to watch. I loved Lucha Underground. It was great. It was super creative. like if you like Marvel and sci-fi and stuff like that, and you also like wrestling, this was those things crunched together in a truly awesome way. It was really creative, and now MLW is sort of like, okay, we're gonna have this almost group that's very similar to Lucha Underground. We're gonna have Dario Cueto under a different name, but you guys know who he is. So very interesting stuff going on with MLW. I'm definitely gonna keep watching that show to see where it develops. Well, I'm definitely going to keep watching when it comes back in July. They've also got to deal with Vice TV now. So they're airing episodes Saturdays at noon on Vice TV to kind of get people caught up with their promotion. And then come July, new programming taped from the ECW Arena in Philadelphia. Dario Cueto is going to be there. The Von Erichs feuding with Team Filthy. A lot of fun stuff going on in MLW at the moment. NXT had a fairly significant show this week. It seemed like they were really motivated to put on a good show this week as they're more established now in their Tuesday time slot. And there was a significant title change that took place. And actually, I was really surprised by this because you've got Shotzi Blackheart and Ember Moon, who I think have been a fantastic tag team. As NXT really tries to establish its women's tag team division, I felt like Shotzi Blackheart and Ember Moon had this like Road Warriors style feel to them. They are these like post-apocalyptic warriors heading out to the ring on a tank. They got face paint on. They got Shotzi Blackheart jumping off of ladders, doing all sorts of crazy stuff. Ember Moon doing similarly cool looking stuff. It just didn't seem like they were going to lose the belts. But that's exactly what happened. The way Candice LeRae and Indy Hartwell won the titles. It seemed very quick. Shotzi Blackheart and Ember Moon didn't even have the titles for 2 months. They had it for 55 days. In fact, these titles haven't existed for more than 2 months, and we've already had 3 champions. Although, granted, we had 2 champions on the first day they existed. Like, if you remember, it was on the March 10th episode. They just kind of said, and we're going to have women's tag champs now, and we're just going to give them to Dakota Kai and Raquel Gonzalez. However, Dakota Kai and Raquel Gonzalez had won the Dusty Rhodes Classic. So it sort of feels like, okay, well, they really won the titles when they won that tournament. It's just for whatever reason. I think it was probably backstage WWE stuff about bringing in the titles. They were like, okay, well, we can't give them the titles after the tournament for whatever reason, so we'll just hand it to them now. So it's like, all right, they did do something to deserve the titles. It's just we didn't give them the titles after that. And of course, Raquel Gonzalez now is the NXT Women's Champion. But yeah, Ember Moon, Shotzi Blackheart, it just felt like, wow, these are great champions. It just felt like this is such a great team to really establish the division with, that I was surprised that their title reign was so quick. And it also seems like, okay, well, it's like if these are important titles, how come 3 teams have already, like, we're averaging new champions every 20 days with these belts already. And so if you look, they only defended these titles twice. They defeated the Aaliyah and Mercedes Martinez on like 2 weeks after they won them by defeating Dakota Kai and Raquel Gonzalez. Then they defeated Candice LeRae and Indy Hartwell at Stand and Deliver. But then in a street fight, Candice LeRae and Indy Hartwell win the title. So like we have to get a trilogy match between these 2 teams. And I don't know who's going to win. It seems like it would be too quick to have yet another title change, but it also seems like Ember Moon and Shotzi Blackheart are the best team in this division. Are they really going to lose again to Candice LeRae and Indy Hartwell? Well, they might. It all depends on where NXT wants to go with this division. All right, so also in NXT, some fun stuff going on. Cameron Grimes is doing this whole thing with Ted DiBiase, which is really great, really fun and entertaining. Not sure where it's going. I mean, is DiBiase going to start managing someone to feud with Cameron Grimes? Are they going to feud over, like, are they going to have a Bitcoin on a pole match? I don't know, but it's pretty fun to watch. So we've gotten 2 weeks of Cameron Grimes being antagonized by Ted DiBiase. I think that's some pretty fun stuff. Isaiah Scott now has a new faction, has a new entourage that helped him once again defeat Leon Ruff. So we'll see where Isaiah Scott is going. If he's going to do some stuff in the cruiserweight division, is he going to do some stuff? Maybe he's going to challenge for the North American division. Definitely, whenever you've put an entourage around a guy, you've got some plans for him. So I would imagine we're going to see Isaiah Scott move up in the NXT rankings soon. We'll just see. But between Isaiah Scott and Cameron Grimes, I think we're starting to get an idea of who's going to be pushed up the rankings a little bit. Saw LA Knight defeat Jake Atlas this week as well, so maybe LA Knight is moving up there. Of course, we got Timothy Thatcher and Tommaso Ciampa acting as a team. So we'll see how long that lasts for, or we'll see if they end up challenging for the titles or what's going to happen with them. But then next week, we've got an NXT Women's Championship match, Raquel Gonzalez versus Mercedes Martinez, and that should be a big match for NXT. So some interesting stuff coming up in NXT these days as well. Finally, the last thing for this video. We are just 8 days away from WrestleMania Backlash, and after last night's SmackDown, the card is starting to become a little bit more solidified. 2 matches were added from the SmackDown brand yesterday. The first was a SmackDown Tag Team title match as Dolph Ziggler and Robert Roode are going to defend against Rey Mysterio and Dominic Mysterio. So that should be kind of interesting as the Dirty Dogs kind of move on from the Street Profits a little bit. You sort of thought the Street Profits were going to get another shot, but the Mysterios will take on the Dirty Dogs at WrestleMania Backlash. I don't imagine it'd be long until the Street Profits get back in there. Now, I think the only other team in the division is Otis and Chad Gable. So, the 4 teams they have will just rotate who gets the title shot. Cesaro defeated Seth Rollins again last night on SmackDown with the stipulation that if he did so, he would earn a shot against Roman Reigns for the Universal Championship at WrestleMania Backlash. And so we'll get that. Cesaro gets his first ever singles match for the Universal Championship, and it'll happen at Backlash. Bianca Belair, after defeating Sasha Banks for the championship at WrestleMania, she will face Sasha Banks' longtime ally, sometimes rival Bayley. In a triple threat match for the Raw Women's Championship, Charlotte Flair has been added to the match between Rhea Ripley and Asuka. So that should be pretty interesting to see who comes out of that, the winner. And do the other 2 start feuding after that? Who knows? And then another triple threat match, this one for the WWE Championship. Bobby Lashley will defend against both Drew McIntyre and Braun Strowman. So 5 matches announced for WrestleMania Backlash so far, with 1 more episode of Raw, 1 more episode of SmackDown to possibly add some matches to the card and to build things up further. And that's going to do it, everyone. You are now completely caught up to date with everything that has been going on in the world of pro wrestling. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button and click the notifications bell so you don't miss out on our next video. Thanks again, everyone. I'm Ian for Channel 4 Wrestling.